Welcome everybody to this afternoon's little debate, and thank you for all coming along. My name's Jon Barrett. I'm the Managing Editor of Electronic Sourcing Magazine and here to chair our little gathering today. So to my left, Teri-Ann Winslow, CEO Winslow Adaptics, followed by Adam Fletcher, Chairman of the Electronic Component Supply Network and the International Distribution of Electronics Association, followed by Ian Wallace, Sales Director UK and Ireland for Digi-Key Corporation, followed by Andrew Maddock, Supply Chain Director at SMS Electronics, and finally Dave White, Senior Branch Manager for Arrow UK Components. The subject for today's discussion really kind of goes back to our time at Electronica last year, where I was in a sort of privileged position to take a look at some of the latest computer-aided design facilities being developed by component manufacturers. And what I was really stunned by initially was the ability of this design software, which was operating in a kind of cloud type environment, its ability to auto-design some aspects of a circuit, and then most importantly of all, the bit that we're interested in today, the ability of that software to then construct a bill of materials in terms of component type, and then to reach out into the cloud, into the internet, to reach into the online inventories of device manufacturers and distributors, and to actually compile a purchasing report effectively. And we were seeing systems that would reach out into distribution where they were looking for inventory that was available, they were looking for component lead time, they were looking for pricing, and they were aggregating that particular set of information in effectively an automated fashion. And that got me thinking, if you extrapolate that and if you move forward a few years, we're already seeing distribution businesses that used to treat their inventory as sacrosanct, really, secret, nothing to be shared, suddenly overnight making their inventory available in a cloud environment to pretty much anyone that wants to take a look in terms of what's available, what pricing regimes are in place. If it's not available, when's it going to be available? Last time buy, notifications, etc., etc. And I'm thinking, if this moves forward in that fashion, are we going to see ever-increasing integration of computer-aided design software and e-commerce facilities such that the kind of manual process of purchasing in terms of going out and sourcing that supplier base, finding that inventory, negotiating that pricing, ever increasingly automated? And if so, who's going to be in charge of that process? Does it suddenly become the remit of the design department? So are the design engineers going to become by default the purchasing department? Alternatively, could the purchasing department grab hold of that and say, well, actually, no, we're going to take all of that and we're going to take the design and creativity software and we're going to start dragging it into our department? Or alternatively, maybe as this scales up, the whole thing's just going to fall to pieces and not going to work, because we've seen that before in plenty of cloud computing environments. My background, aside to my magazine publishing, I do get involved in writing code and developing software, and have been party to just such inter-system cloud-based software collaboration projects. So I know it can be done because I've been part of some of those projects. And so really today the big question is, what is the future role of the professional purchasing manager in an electronics design and manufacturing environment, in specifically I think today in the UK. I don't want to broaden this out to a global discussion because different regions are manufacturing in different volumes at different price points, and the whole negotiation process is very different. But in the UK, certainly where we're looking at small to medium volume, niche, specialist design, where does that level of software integration between design and e-commerce leave the purchasing department over, say, the next 2, 3 or 4 years, maybe even beyond? So I'm now going to turn to the panel and just offer our panel members the opportunity to speak for a few minutes in terms of where you think the role of purchasing and design and distribution is going to reside over coming years. Okay. Teri.
Okay, I'll just say to start with that I'm not in purchasing and I'm not a design engineer. So I suppose I can kind of sit on the fence a little bit with this. I think my immediate concerns that come into my head when I listen to what Jon's saying is that if we try to create something that all encompasses those two disciplines, to me, I immediately think, oh, that ain't going to work. Because purchasing is a very specific type of role, and engineering is also a very specific type of role, and never the twain shall meet. I've been in meetings where I've been invited to talk to purchasing and talk to engineering and put my product forward. And I've had purchasing over here, and I've had engineers over here, and I've been sitting in the middle, and they've argued over what their company's doing, not what I can offer to solve. So I actually, in answer to the question, very briefly think that that won't work. But I think that it's needed, and yes, if we concentrate on the UK, then manufacturing in the UK is what we're interested in, but we can't get away from the fact that we are in a global environment, and in order to be successful in our manufacturing markets, we need to make sure that we know what's going on outside. So if something's adopted by the US, for example, and we're suppliers into the US, it could be that they're going to force the pace and say, well, actually, guys, just because you're not doing it right now because you think it doesn't work, we're going to say you've got to. So we have to have some kind of idea of how that would work, and we have to put it into our businesses potentially. But from my perspective with procurement and engineering, I would love to see them working together as a team. And if I put my component obsolescence group hat on, that is something that we're quite passionate about at the moment, because the purchasing guys, girls, are the gatekeepers. They're the goalkeepers. They're kind of there, and they get it when something goes obsolete. But the engineers are designing in what they like because they prefer Altera or they prefer Xilinx, so they're doing. But it could be that they don't have the longevity that they require for their applications. So it's about communication as far as I'm concerned. So perhaps this software is about communication ultimately, because what they're saying is that we will give the design department everything he needs to be able to design his module and get the products he needs. And he can choose what he wants, he can see when it's in stock, he can see how much it's going to cost, he can stick it on the bill of materials, done deal. Purchasing, we don't need you anymore, we don't like you, so you can go. But actually in reality that's not going to happen, because he's going to move on to the next project. He's going to be told, well, we actually need you to go to the US now, or to Europe, because we've got a project over there, potentially. Or even just move up to Scotland, to the site in Scotland. And so he leaves behind, perhaps, a lot of information. So purchasing needs to be there, in my view.
So it's all about communication.
Absolutely.
Okay. Adam?
Good. Well, I can answer the question fairly quickly. I think the role of the purchasing manager is fairly safe, and it will be for a very long time. The systems that we're looking at are going to be very helpful in terms of improving the effectiveness of individuals in the engineering and in the purchasing community. People have been buying, or engineers have been able to select NPI products and purchase them independently for at least 10 years. And I think that the trend onto an online system is just the start of that activity, or so it's a continuum of that activity. However, it's mainly at the NPI stage. It's only when it goes beyond NPI into a real product, when you start to really evaluate it, that you then start to put a lot more effort into looking at why you're doing it. Is it strategically correct? Is the fit of the suppliers right? Are we choosing the right components? Part of the problem is that there's an enormous amount of information available out there, but there's no intelligence behind it. So when an engineer selects product X, there's a whole lot of differentiators between product X. Which package is it going to be in? Which shipping material is it going to be in for the manufacturing process? And whilst he can see the product, he can't see a lot of the other information. A lot of the other information he needs to know about is which is going to be the high volume runner. Because if he chooses something in a fairly esoteric package, it might be very nice from an engineering perspective, but might not be so useful from a purchasing perspective, because you can't buy it in the volumes, or you can't achieve the pricing, because it's not going to be the high volume runner. So I think it's a very safe environment. It's going to possibly, from our perspective, free up purchasing managers to spend more time negotiating the higher value business, which I think was probably where they need to focus their efforts. I would love to see the engineers placing the high value orders. I think it's unlikely to happen. Having said that, you can migrate an engineer to be a purchasing manager. It's very difficult to migrate a purchasing manager back to be an engineer. So I think today we're safe. And we are seeing a very accelerated change in the market. Certainly if you went back 10 years ago, you'd never think that high volume distributors would be able to supply CAE software and all the online tools that they're providing today. We just didn't think that would happen, and it is happening, and it's moving forward. But I don't think it's going to dramatically affect the relationships between the buyer and seller, and I hope that actually what it does is it improves it significantly.
Over to me. Right, I'm Ian Wallace. I've worked in the electronics industry for just about 25 years. So I've spent 12 years working for manufacturers, 12 years in broadline distribution, and then I've just completed 1 year with Digi-Key. And that year with Digi-Key has been a real eye-opener for me on how business models are changing. I think that when I look at life in general over the last year or even 2 years, how business models have changed, how our lives are. You know, looking at paying a bill, doing banking online. If you need to buy a present and it's late, you use Amazon, music, iTunes. And so we've all started using the web and the internet more. And I visit a lot of customers, primarily UK and Ireland. I visit a lot of customers, and seeing how much they're using these web-based tools, ordering over the internet, getting tech support via the web, you know, checking what supply chain that Digi-Key has maybe for them in place. There's a lot of it going on. I say the last year was a real eye-opener for me. So the use of the tools, I think, people have got to do more with less. You know, sometimes you go to a customer, there's one less buyer or there's two less engineers. So using these tools, say Digi-Key's got a BOM manager, we can engineers can load up part numbers, or purchasing people can. I think they've really got to utilise them, and as they change, that's going to be a benefit to them. So efficiency is key. And I feel they really need to sort of, you know, make the most of these tools. Now, when I was thinking about the question, you know, purchasing people or designers, who's going to control that purchasing? It's a tough question, and I thought of 4 key metrics that I think businesses are measured on. They look at managing cost and risk, time to market, flexibility, and basically optimising the supply chain of their chosen distributor, whoever they may be. And I think managing cost and risk, purchasing people, they manage the cost. They should know what the cost is and what the risk is. But also the engineer's got a responsibility too. When he designs that part in, he has to make sure it's right for the company, it's the right choice, the purchasing people can do it. So for that, I think that's hand in hand, they both have to do it. Time to market, you know, it often has to be accelerated. You know, it's got to be quick. You've got to get that product out there. These tools are key, whether it's a CAD design tool online or whether it's, you know, uploading for bills and materials and getting pricing, seeing what stock is. That's key. And again, I think both have a responsibility for that. Flexibility, you know, the market's quite dynamic. We can't control everything in it. And often things change and you need a contingency. And that's where, again, using these tools, the engineer and the purchasing person together can look at getting that contingency so they can keep the company moving forward even if something is disrupting it. And optimising supply chain, say whether it's Digi-Key or another distributor companies use, that's key to optimise that. Digi-Key, I know it's about 300 people who work on people's buffer stocks, the supply chain, to keep that going. So for me, each of those points, I think it's both. Not wanting to sit on the fence, but it's hand in hand. I believe it's both together, that they have to work together, and that will get the best result in the foreseeable future for that company.
Thanks, yeah. Andrew?
Okay. Andrew Maddock, Supply Chain Director at SMS Electronics. I've been with SMS Electronics for over 10 years on the purchasing and subcontract electronic world. Prior to that I was at Siemens as an OEM. So I've seen the transition from the OEM into the contract world. I'm pleased to say on the subcontract world there's no debate, we don't have design engineering, so my job in purchasing is pretty safe. But yeah, it's an interesting debate. I look at the software from a different perspective as a series of algorithms and rules. And basically, however you set up the rules and work those algorithms, the software will do what you ask it to do. So from an engineering perspective, what information is it going to go and glean from the cloud? Well, if you've got a strategic relationship with a distributor and the information goes off and gets a price from a totally unrelated partner, your price might be wrong. It might be the wrong strategic direction that the business wants to go in terms of its engagements. So you've got to make sure that tools are in place for engineers are actually going to look at the correct information. So from that basis, are you asking the engineer to then strategically decide which OEM component manufacturers he wants to engage with? Well, no, that's a buying function, isn't it? So somebody's still doing that. Yes, it would be an incredibly useful tool for an engineer to design products and say, right, I know that this business is going to choose that manufacturer and these are the parts that are widely available and in mass production, and then pick those and put them into design in line with whatever corporately you've done. But that negotiation, that direction still has to be done by a function, which in my view sits in purchasing still. My other thought pattern is purchasing. What is it? Well, if it's strategically negotiating contracts, engaging with suppliers, that's one type of function. There's also the tactical processing of purchase orders. Well, if everything's there on a system and it's going to your preferred vendor, accessing your negotiated price book, does it matter who presses the button to say place PO with that vendor? So I could see that side of the purchasing function sitting anywhere. It could be a buyer, it could be an engineer, it could be a robot loading a bill of materials with a quantity. But there's going to be a purchasing function always that's sitting there strategically looking at putting together packages, economies of scale, doing all the things we've discussed previously, looking at the buffer stocking, looking at profiling against forecast. So there's lots of things that software can do to integrate the two functions to work more closely. And instead of having the old-fashioned days where the design engineer will create a bill of materials, chuck it over the wall, purchasing will have a look at it, send it back with things crossed out, and then they'll chuck it back and then they'll negotiate. It'll actually expedite, as Ian says, the time to market. You know, to design something in, to know, to have a understanding of cost up front of what the engineer's designing in. Yes, that will reduce the time. It will give you visibility against budget and you know, the viability of some of the projects that the engineers are looking at. But fundamentally, somebody's still got to have buying as a skill in somewhere in the organisation, and it's different to engineering. You can't expect an engineer to have all of the capabilities of an engineer and then take on top of that all of the purchasing skill. So in my view, there will still be two distinct functions that will be more closely integrated, and software will help the speed of the decision making and the communication and integrate more with the partners in the field to give you instant access to the information. So yes, they'll coexist.
Thank you. Fantastic. David?
Yeah, so Dave White, I'm one of the branch managers for Aero. I think one of the things that we look at as a business is we represent most of the leading suppliers across electronic components, so we can see quite a broad view of the marketplace. Application engineers for us is quite a prerequisite for our marketplace, and also we spend a lot of time with the application engineers trying to look at designing in new products with many, many different customers. I think the way we try and view things is a consultative approach, so that's the best ones for us, are a mixture of the design engineers and the purchasing community coming together to look at what the strategy is for that particular customer, because everyone is different. I think if you look at designing in the cloud, you take away that ability to look individually at the customer and look at actually what their needs are individually. So consultation, I think, is how we view things. We've got many, many different suppliers we could offer to customers, but that might not be right for what they want to do in their own business. They may decide to go with a different platform, different supplier that's strategically part of their decision-making process. So I think our view of the market is that we can consult with them, offer and advise in terms of what's available, and also look to give them advice about where longevity of supply is. Obsolescence management is obviously key, not designing in a product where there's very, very few customers worldwide, but where there's a mixture of very many customers on a global basis. As Andy says, We can look then for inventory management. Designing something in means it's got to be available to go to the marketplace. So I think this approach of collaborating together from our perspective as a distributor with the design community and purchasing as well, for me, I think is the way that we should view the best way of operating to try and get the most effective design in the marketplace that actually the customer can sell, because that's the main thing, is can you take a product to market which is saleable in the right time frame as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, I've been scribbling notes, but there were really, I think, only 2 words I needed to put down, which were communication and collaboration, which is, to me, what it sounded like we've been discussing there. If I just kind of summarise my thoughts from everything that's been said, which is fascinating, sounds to me like they are 2 separate disciplines and not necessarily 2 interchangeable skill sets, which I think would be agreed. One question I was going to ask: I never considered it possible to study purchasing in the electronics industry as something you could study at sort of degree level, whereas you can design. Yes. Is that still the case? Are you guys aware of academic qualifications that one?
Yeah, I mean, there's purchasing qualifications. I'm not directly aware of any of the qualifications that are purchasing in the electronics environment.
So there'd be general.
It tends to be industrial distribution, and the biggest universities in the US, Texas A&M is the biggest one, and it has a very strong industrial course for distributors, and it's very well used.
Okay. So in a kind of an academic role pre-workplace, those 2 disciplines are still being treated separately, effectively. Yeah, and quite clearly the one of the things that software is exceptionally good at is joining together systems that don't necessarily naturally join together by themselves. Again, a classic role for a cloud-based environment there, and requires the bravery, I guess, of distribution, and I'll direct this at the 2 distributors that we have here, to actually expose your inventory to the big, wide world in such a way that both design and purchasing can access it in real time. I imagine that was a fairly brave and difficult decision to have to have made whenever you made it. Yeah. At that particular point, we'll stop and to see if we can find some questions from our audience. So in terms, same sort of question effectively, and in reply to what's been said here, the role of purchasing.
Who is operating the cloud systems at the moment? Is it, in terms of people displaying inventory, is it component manufacturers or largely distribution?
Shall I, if I can kick in with that first of all, and then we'll get some comment. The systems that we were taking a look at throughout last year, interestingly, come from a variety of different sources, and they're all kind of trying to do things from a slightly different angle, but with a common goal, which is to join together these sort of design and purchasing functions. Obviously, we've seen design and BOM management tools coming through from the distribution chain, all the way through to iPhone applications allowing you to manage supply chain on the move. Associations, we've seen doing the same thing for franchised distributors around the world, providing that, from what I can see, as I'd have to ask some more questions, but as a kind of member benefit, effectively. So join our association, and your inventory will join our global inventory management system that people can access, that customers can access. And then finally, from semiconductor manufacturers that have a sort of vested interest in very quickly and effectively building a kind of passive bill of materials around their device. So taking away some of the legwork of specifying their device by taking away the design of the support circuitry and the procurement of those components. So I've seen those two. I don't know if you guys, so that's that's distribution, device manufacturer and associations all trying to do it. I don't know if you guys have seen anyone, and I guess there are also independent software development companies that are just coming in with standalone products, like the CAD vendors.
It's certainly manufacturers as well. Quite a few of the manufacturers have their own simulation software tools as well. And we actually have online, some simple design circuitry like lighting designs or lighting applications. So I think it's the more simplified designs that perhaps is where most benefit could be given on this one, because obviously a lot of people need to do a lot of things in terms of design and the evolution of that. But I think once you get into more complex designs, I think that's where the value of direct contact, with engineers and application engineers and suppliers probably comes. But certainly from our perspective, we're hosting, in fact we bought a company a few years ago, Transim, as part of the Arrow Group, and that's a web-based online cloud company, separate to what we do in components, but we can see the evolution of that from our perspective with some of the online things like the lighting manager I mentioned, to help people do more straightforward designs. I suppose that's where we see it at the minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very much, Digi-Key's very much an online company. It's a virtual company. With my addition, there's an office in Munich. We've just become slightly less virtual, so we've added a few people, but we're very keen to share. We're a private company. We've got a lot of stock. We're keen to share that, and we've got the website, which has been developed over the years, which shows that stock. It shows factory stock, and our customers like to self-serve online. There are third parties also that purchasing departments use that show the availability as well. But yeah, and again, we've got tech support online. The amount of hits on our website is phenomenal, and that online sort of service is something we'll keep doing, but just as a company, slightly less virtual, looking at supporting purchasing people as well as the designers, supply chain, and just moving up slightly in the volumes, so that high mix, low to medium volume, and yeah, that's the way Digi-Key's evolving. Will continue to evolve.
We're getting a great deal of price transparency. You'll be able to see globally, worldwide, what the price of any component is, but only at very low volumes. Now, from an engineering perspective, engineers need to design in very new, innovative products that enables their end product to get a lead in the market. And what they really need to know, which they can't see from the web easily, is where that product sits in its life cycle. Yeah? Is it very new? Is it at volume? Is it at the end of life? You've got to just, that information isn't there, and you've got to talk to people to find that information. And I tend to say to people, use the FAE. The FAE is your walking internet source, because he can tell you what's really happening in his customers in the UK. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of other areas that are becoming important in that. Yeah. So just having a price is pretty useless, really. I mean, it gives you a guide, but nothing more.
So in essence, where we're at the moment in terms of that sort of transparency of stock and pricing is primarily from an engineering perspective at the new product introduction stage of greatest value. But as soon as it moves beyond that, you're moving into human negotiated pricing settlements. I guess that's still the case.
I think it also depends on the type of engineers that you have in the organisation, and perhaps the age as well, because traditionally maybe those engineers wouldn't be using any kind of cloud type software application, because that's new, and in a lot of respects people don't like change at that level. So there becomes an education issue. Yep. So then you almost put a bigger divide in between purchasing and engineering, because perhaps purchasing in that environment will be telling those engineers that they must do this because that's the way it's going and that's the way our company wants to go. But actually the engineers aren't going to want to do that and perhaps will drag their heels. So again, it's about education and communication and making sure that everybody understands what's available to them. And in my company, when my design engineers are looking for components to use, they will always go to the catalogue houses. And let me tell you,
high service distributors.
Okay. Sorry, it's just I've been in the industry for 20 years. You used to be called catalogue. Okay, so is it all right for me to call you that?
Most of you don't care.
And sometimes I question why they go to a particular catalogue distributors.
Ease of doing business.
Do you know what it is? It's actually not just that. It's the interface. It's who's got the best website. Where is it quick for me to find what I need? You know, this is the value of the capacitor or whatever they need, and they type it in, and if there's a website there that's not doing it how they want it to, so there you go. They're not choosing you always.
I think
in my
we've got a long way to go yet.
Absolutely.
We can't get to this one-click approach that
No.
Amazon has, and that's going to take a little bit of time,
Yeah.
I think. But it is moving in that direction.
Yeah.
And you know, I think what the high service distributors have done in terms of building communities around the engineering groups is very, very clever, and will have to be addressed by a wider range of the authorised distributors. Because by building a community and getting engineers to talk and feel comfortable online and comfortable doing this interaction, it builds long-term support for the organisation.
Yeah.
My fear, if you sit back as the management of an organisation, is how much time are they spending on that, you know, and how much time, you want to be part of a community and serve a community, but you don't want to be funding the whole community. You want to use a community when it's valid for you to get information. You've got to recognise you've got to give a bit back, but it's knowing how to, and I think some of those boundaries are going to be a bigger issue for some of the engineering groups to get over.
Yeah.
I've certainly seen, I'd like to give you an example. If you wanted to use the internet now on free cloud-based software, take a component and stick it into 5 websites, you'll get 5 different answers. Which one's the right one? At the moment, the engineer's not qualified to make that call. Which website do you want to go to? The buyer knows that I can use a tool from Arrow, or I can use a tool from Digi-Key for a particular type of component or a particular manufacturer. So at the moment, that's still done within purchasing, and the systems that are there aren't the finished article. There's some that are close, that have some bits missing, but I've got one example. I was looking for life cycle phase, export classification number, stock availability and price last week, and I got 5 different answers for the same part. Yeah, and I'm saying from mature to early life for the same manufacturer's component. Yeah. So the databases have to be right.
Yeah, so there's no standardised data.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the future for my requirement will be data mining from custom-driven software to say, okay, Arrow has a tool, I want to drive these enquiries to the Arrow website, grab that information, I might want to go somewhere else for that, I might want to go to this engineering database and present that, and that would be useful to engineers.
I mean, I'd been taught early in my engineering career that the most standard product in the world is a ball bearing. And I can go to any distributor from any manufacturer of ball bearings, and effectively I'm going to get standardised data on that. And I'd always assumed that electronic components would fall into that category. Clearly, that's not necessarily the case from what you're saying, in that there's variation in that data. So, where's the gap? Is it from the device manufacturer? Is it from the distribution chain? Is it from franchise or non-franchise distribution? Where's the disparity?
There's not one fits all solution. So you can go to a manufacturer and that might give you life cycle data.
Where it is in its life cycle.
They might give you a price indication, but that price indication will bear no resemblance to what you can get on a quote.
By and large, the manufacturers, in terms of technology, are behind the distributors in terms of what's available in the marketplace for people to look at. And I think they need to play catch up, really, because ultimately distributors are fed with the data from the manufacturer, and at the moment they're having to populate a lot of that information themselves, which probably isn't ideal. But the manufacturers are very focused on making products and this very small number of key customers, and haven't really got into the mode of creating and putting data in a standardised way, which people can pull off. And so that's why I think sometimes you end up with this discrepancy.
So I guess that is a place where the associations and federations could play a role in driving some form of improved global standardisation.
We're putting a global website together. We already have it running in the US. It's called ECIA Authorised. It'll be launched in Europe later this year. It'll just be called Authorised. And what we're doing there is putting all the franchised authorised manufacturers' products on one website, so we know there's only authorised there, and if anybody's going to it, it's only authorised product. There won't be anything else. There are lots of other sites that have a range, and you can select, and as you say, you can tell the search engine what you want to look for. But people have different views, and we're trying to support multiple. You know, as a trade association, we support the industry one, and we support some non-industry commercial websites, because we feel that there's, you know, customers need to have access to a range of solutions rather than just one.
Another question?
If you go back 15, 20 years when you had very big sites, where you had big purchasing departments, and you had lots and lots and lots of design engineers, you had somebody called the component engineer. You know, I think by and large component engineering has disappeared from all but probably military customers. Where did that function go? Has it gone to purchasing, or has it gone to into the design engineers, or is it, as you've been suggesting, somewhere between the two? What's happened to that function?
Well, from my point of view, I think, you know, a lot of the engineers now, where they used to have a, you know, a meeting, and it's still necessary, absolutely. You know, Dave's FAE needs to go in for a meeting, and they have a meeting for an hour or so, and they get a design done. The self-service now, companies are under pressure to deliver, and there's time to market. And I think each of the individual engineers now, they go onto the website to self-service. We've got the technical data there, and they can start the design on their own. And a lot of these engineers are obviously very capable, and they can do that, and that, I think, partly has negated the component engineer. But I know exactly what you mean. You used to go through the component engineer to see what was going on, to see if the components were right for the application and the design. But again, business models are changing, and I think there's more, you know, individuals that are going onto the different websites and doing the design on their own. They don't always need, and sometimes they do need the FAE to go in, but other times they can do the work on their own, self-service on the internet, and then follow through to work with purchasing to place the order, get the bill of materials right. But yeah, good question.
I'd like to say I still have a component engineer
Right.
who does two functions for us. The primary function is where we take bill of materials from customers that have used, what was the term? High value distribution? High service distribution, where they're giving us incomplete part numbers. That component engineering function then takes that part number, interprets it to the manufacturer's code that we want to buy in terms of the format of the packaging, etc., life cycle, gathering MSL data, ROS data, all of that, things that we need in our database to provide our service. We also offer that to customers, where they're at a layout stage and saying, like, I know I want to use a certain type of logic. Which package should I use? Which manufacturer should I use? How can I multi-source? So we still have that function. It's morphed slightly. It's not the old OEM function, but it's still there and very, very important to us.
Well, I think a lot of the roles have evolved as electronics has matured, as well as a marketplace. You know, you don't just get a buyer, a sales rep, an engineer. You know, you get people whose roles now have evolved in the marketplace as well. You know, our salespeople now have to be technically astute. You know, the days have gone where they walk in the door, you know, and just try and take a purchase order. They're trying to also consult themselves in their own role. So we see the same thing in engineering and purchasing as well, where everybody's roles has evolved into bigger roles than they were probably 10 or 15 years ago. You know, so I think probably the roles of component engineering exists everywhere now, because everybody's roles is to try and make sure that the products are right for the marketplace, you know, have the life cycle capabilities, you know, we're giving the right advice. And I think everybody, you know, here probably has seen their own department's roles evolve over the last 10 or 15 years or so, and it probably will evolve even more with the advent of the cloud, or how we're going to evolve in the marketplace.
It may also be something to do with the size of the organisation. You know, when organisations were fairly large and had a very large team of people, actually the component engineering function was very important to provide some sort of standardisation on where they were going, and they were listening to the engineer and to the purchasing community and trying to drive a path to bring the whole design together. And in general, they did a very good job, and so that must be being replicated, but possibly not with that same job title.
I think that the other thing is that jobs have gone. You know, we can't pretend. And you know, when you're deciding on in larger organisations what to make redundant, potentially it's those roles that go. And that's an unfortunate thing, because they were the stepping stone, if you like, between purchasing and engineering, and an extremely good one. And it should come back, in my view, definitely.
So maybe the true role for this cloud-based software is to try and replicate some of those skills, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite possible.
Mm. Well, we're at time, so unless there are any other burning questions out there in the audience, I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for coming along, for the people who asked the questions, and then most importantly of all, for our panel of guests here for speaking so clearly and answering questions so such detail. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.